The first time I saw her again, it felt like the room forgot how to breathe. 20 years disappeared in a single heartbeat as she stood at the entrance of our high school reunion, looking older, wiser, and somehow even more familiar than she had in my memories. I had spent years convincing myself that some chapters of life were meant to stay closed forever. I believed that first loves belonged to the past, that missed chances could never be reclaimed, and that regrets eventually became quiet enough to live with. But the moment our eyes met, every excuse I had built over the years collapsed. A few minutes later, while I stood alone near the old trophy case trying to hide from the crowd, she walked beside me, leaned close enough for only me to hear, and whispered softly that I still owed her that date. In that instant, everything I thought I had buried came rushing back. Before we continue this unforgettable journey, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who believes in kindness and second chances, and subscribe to Kindness Corner. Your support helps us keep bringing stories that remind the world that hope and love never truly disappear. Back in high school, I was the quiet kid who always sat near the window. I wasn't popular, athletic, or particularly confident. My family struggled financially, and while other students talked about vacations and new cars, I spent weekends helping my father repair old appliances, just so we could pay the bills. Despite everything, there was one bright part of every school day. Her name was Emily. She wasn't the loudest girl in school, nor the captain of every club, but she carried herself with a warmth that made everyone around her feel noticed. She smiled at janitors, remembered birthdays, and volunteered whenever someone needed help. To me, she seemed completely out of reach. For 4 years, I admired her from a distance. We shared a few classes, laughed during group projects, and occasionally walked the same hallway after school, but I never gathered the courage to tell her how I felt. Every time I planned to ask her out, another voice inside me reminded me that I had nothing to offer. I couldn't afford expensive dates. I didn't wear fashionable clothes. I believed someone like her deserved someone far better than me. Near graduation, something unexpected happened. During the senior picnic, we ended up sitting together beneath an old oak tree while everyone else played games. We talked for nearly 2 hours about dreams, fears, and the future. It was the easiest conversation I had ever had with anyone. Before we left that afternoon, she smiled and jokingly told me that if I ever found enough courage, I should ask her out before someone else did. I laughed nervously, assuming she was only being kind. I never asked. Just a week later, my father suffered a serious accident at work. Everything changed overnight. College plans disappeared, and I immediately started working full-time to help support my family. Graduation came and went in a blur of hospital visits, overtime shifts, and unpaid bills. Emily left for another state to attend university, and life quietly carried us in different directions, without either of us realizing how permanent that goodbye would become. The following years were filled with responsibilities instead of adventures. My father slowly recovered, but could never return to his old job. My mother developed health problems, and every extra dollar went toward medicine or rent. Friends got married, traveled, and built exciting careers while I measured success by whether our lights stayed on another month. Somewhere along the way, I convinced myself that happiness belonged to other people. Then, life dealt another painful blow. My parents both passed away within 3 years of each other. Losing them left a silence inside my house that no television or radio could fill. After their funerals, I realized I had become a man who knew how to survive, but had forgotten how to truly live. My days became predictable. Work, home, sleep, repeat. The calendar changed, but nothing else seemed to. When the invitation for our 20th high school reunion arrived in the mail, I almost threw it away. The thought of walking into a room filled with successful classmates felt unbearable. I imagined conversations about promotions, happy marriages, and beautiful families while I stood there with nothing interesting to say. But something inside me whispered that perhaps it was time to stop hiding from my own life. After several days of hesitation, I decided to go. The reunion took place inside the same school gym where we had once attended pep rallies and graduation rehearsals. Everything looked smaller than I remembered. The basketball court had been polished, banners covered the walls, and old photographs were displayed across long tables. Laughter echoed through the room as classmates hugged each other, after decades apart. I smiled politely, shook a few hands, and listened to stories of careers and children. Everyone seemed genuinely happy to reconnect, yet I still felt like an outsider looking through a window. Eventually, I wandered into the hallway outside the gym, where the noise faded into distant echoes. I found myself standing in front of the old trophy case, staring at faded photographs of teenagers who believed the future would always be kind. That was when she found me. Emily approached quietly, carrying the same gentle smile I remembered from years ago. Time had added a few lines around her eyes, but somehow, those lines only reflected a life filled with compassion instead of regret. She looked at me for several seconds before softly reminding me that I still owed her that date. I laughed, partly from surprise, and partly because my heart had completely forgotten how to behave. I admitted that I thought she had been joking all those years ago. She smiled sadly and explained that she had waited longer than I could ever imagine. As the evening continued, we talked for hours. We spoke about our parents, our dreams, the mistakes we made, and the people we had become. She shared that she had become a pediatric nurse because she wanted children facing difficult days to always see one comforting face. She had married once, but her husband passed away after a long illness several years earlier. Since then, she had devoted herself almost entirely to caring for others. When she asked about my life, I struggled to summarize decades of sacrifice without sounding bitter. I told her about my parents, the jobs, the loneliness, and the opportunities that quietly slipped away. She listened without interrupting, never offering pity, only understanding. As the reunion ended, she surprised me again by handing me a folded piece of paper. Inside was her phone number, along with a short handwritten sentence reminding me that she was still waiting for that date whenever I finally felt ready. For 3 days, I carried that note inside my wallet. Fear returned almost immediately. I wondered whether she had simply been polite. I worried that I was too old, too ordinary, too damaged by life to deserve another chance at happiness. Every excuse that had silenced me in high school returned, only stronger. On the 4th evening, after staring at my phone for nearly an hour, I finally called. She answered, before the first ring had fully ended. Our first date happened at a small family-owned diner that neither of us had visited before. There were no expensive gifts, no fancy restaurants, and no grand romantic gestures. We simply talked. For nearly 4 hours, we laughed about awkward high school memories, remembered teachers whose names we had almost forgotten, and discovered that despite taking completely different paths through life, we had somehow remained remarkably similar inside. As weeks became months, our friendship grew naturally. We visited bookstores, walked through local parks, volunteered together at community food drives, and spent quiet evenings drinking coffee while watching sunsets. For the first time in decades, I looked forward to tomorrow. Emily possessed a remarkable ability to notice pain that other people ignored. During one volunteer event, she quietly bought groceries for an elderly man who pretended he had forgotten his wallet. Another afternoon, she spent hours comforting a frightened child at the hospital, long after her shift officially ended. Watching her reminded me that genuine kindness rarely announces itself. It simply appears wherever it is needed most. Slowly, her compassion changed me too. Instead of rushing home after work, I began volunteering alongside her. We repaired homes for elderly neighbors, organized winter clothing drives, and mentored teenagers who reminded me of the shy boy I had once been. Somewhere between painting walls and carrying food boxes, I realized that life hadn't ended while I was busy surviving. It had simply been waiting for me to start living again. One autumn afternoon, we returned to our old high school for a community fundraiser. The same oak tree, where we had once talked as teenagers, still stood near the football field. We walked toward it without saying much. Standing beneath those familiar branches, I admitted something I had carried for 20 years. I confessed that I had loved her since the day we first met, but believed I wasn't good enough to deserve someone like her. She smiled with tears in her eyes. She explained that she had never wanted perfection. She had only wanted honesty. The boy who treated everyone with quiet respect, who worked tirelessly for his family, and who always placed others before himself had been exactly the person she hoped would eventually ask her out. Life hadn't kept us apart because love was missing. It had kept us apart because fear spoke louder than hope. Hearing those words hurt and healed me at the same time. Months later, on another peaceful evening beneath that same tree, I finally asked the question I should have asked decades earlier. This time, neither of us had to wait for the answer. Our wedding wasn't extravagant. Friends from high school attended alongside neighbors, co-workers, former patients, and families we had met through volunteer work. Instead of expensive decorations, the room was filled with handwritten notes, describing acts of kindness people had witnessed throughout their lives. It became less of a wedding and more of a celebration of second chances. Sometimes, I still think about the years we lost. I wonder what life might have looked like if I had simply believed in myself long enough to ask one simple question before graduation. But then, I remember everything those difficult years taught me: compassion, patience, gratitude, strength. Without those lessons, perhaps I would never have become the man capable of appreciating the extraordinary gift that waited for me decades later. Life rarely follows the timeline we expect. Sometimes dreams arrive years late. Sometimes love circles back after we believe it's gone forever. Sometimes, the greatest miracle isn't finding someone new, but discovering that someone never truly stopped believing in you. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to Kindness Corner. Every act of support helps these stories reach people who may be waiting for their own second chance. Special request, before you leave, tell us in the comments about one opportunity, friendship, or dream you hope life gives you another chance to experience. Your story might become the encouragement someone else desperately needs. As we drove home from visiting our old high school one final time, Emily reached across the seat and held my hand exactly as the sun disappeared beyond the horizon. I realized that happiness isn't measured by how early it arrives, but by whether we have the courage to recognize it when it finally does. 20 years earlier, fear had stolen one date, but kindness, patience, and hope gave us a lifetime together. And if our story proves anything, it's that some promises are never too old to keep. Some hearts never truly stop waiting, and sometimes the most beautiful chapter of your life begins only after you believe the story is already over.